The only way out of Lodabar for Mephibosheth was required that a prior promise be remembered and a cherished covenant be fulfilled. David sent the invitation through Ziba, but Mephibosheth had to move from Lodabar to the palace in order to claim his blessing. And so do you. If you want the blessings of God out of your life, you've got to get out of Lodabar. You've got to come to the palace of the king. You've got to come to God. He'd been wounded and maimed by the one that loved him and had been responsible to take care of him. And so many times we are injured, we're wounded in our relationship and our walk with God, and we're hurt. Just because we get hurt doesn't mean that God intends for us to stay in Lodabar. You might have been wounded by the very one that loves you in the house of God. But allow them to pick you up and take you to safety. Allow them to help you carry on. God has sent me today to tell you there's room for you in the palace. There's room for you in the palace. Mephibosheth had spent a lifetime hiding out in darkness, existing in fear, deception, nothingness, intimidation. It haunted him. Poverty. But royalty came to him. The covenant of the promise outlasted his hopelessness. You don't have to hide in fear no longer. The King of Kings has sent for you, and he desires for each and every one of you to dine at his table. He's calling out to someone saying, you don't have to live in Lodabar. You don't have to live in that place. I've called you to my palace. I want you to sit at my table. I want you to dine with me. When Mephibosheth, he came back to the palace of his childhood, he sat at the king's table. Let me tell you this. He sat there. He ate a king's meal. But the best part of this, let me tell you, the best part of him sitting at the king's table is because when he sat at the king's table, his paralyzed body was underneath the table. You couldn't tell. He came to the house of God. He came to the palace. He was sitting at the table and eating. And his infirmities, it wasn't noticeable to everybody. He was sitting there. Come to God. Pull up to his table. Allow him to cover your infirmities. To the world, Mephibosheth, he was damaged goods. But to the king, he was a candidate for grace. Listen to Pastor today. You may come to the Lord's Supper, and the Lord's table is wounded and maimed for life. But once you sit down at his table, your lameness is covered, and you become just like anybody else because you have become a candidate for grace. I'm talking to somebody here today that you've been living in ways that you're not happy the way you live. You're not satisfied in the way that you're going in your life and your relationship. But you've come to the palace today. You've come to the king's table, and he's beckoning somebody to come and dine. Come and dine at the master's table. Come and dine. Maybe you've got the opinion that you're damaged goods and that you're just a candidate for grace here today. Simon Peter, he denied knowing Jesus. He cussed out the young lady who pointed him out as a companion of Christ. But grace had already been activated on his behalf. See, Jesus had told Peter that what he had already foretold and told him everything that he was going to do. And he had prayed for him that Satan would not sift him as wheat. And Jesus, when he was resurrected from the dead, he met Mary at the tomb that day. And he told her, go tell my disciples and Peter. He specifically called out Peter. He said, tell my disciples and Peter. Because Peter, knowing that he had denied Christ, and he was living with this haunting him every step of the way. I'm the cause of his death. I denied him. It's my fault. And he's living with this. And had not Jesus specifically gave instructions to call out Peter's name, if they just came and said, Jesus said to tell my disciples that I'm alive, Peter would have thought, well, he wasn't talking about me because immediately when I denied him, he cast me out. But no, he said, tell the disciples and Peter. And Peter. He wanted Peter to know that he cared for him. He made a point for her to tell Peter personally that he was calling for him. You see, before Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, Peter was damaged goods. But afterwards, he was a candidate for divine grace. There's somebody here today that's turned your back on God. You've walked away from your relationship with God, and God is saying that doesn't matter. He's calling out to his disciples and I can heal those infirmities. I can heal those things. Would you stand with me this morning? My mind goes to the story of the prodigal son where he was an heir. He had a good life. He had everything going for him, but somehow, he become disgruntled. He become unhappy. Maybe he wasn't satisfied with the way things was going in his life. And so he decided to go to his daddy and say, Daddy, I want what's rightfully mine. I want my inheritance. I want to go. I can do this on my own. You see, there's safety in the Father's house. There's safety in the Father's house. It's where you need to be at. Back in the Father's house. You may have went down the wrong road. You may have made some mistakes, but the Father's calling to you today. You see, the prodigal son, he went out and he spent his inheritance on righteous living. And sin is fun for a season. But it's going to cost you a lot. It's going to keep you there for a long time. It's going to be a whole lot more than you want to pay. And he went out into sin and he spent all of his inheritance. And then he got to a place in his life where he realized, if I could just be and live as a servant in my Father's house. They've got so much more than what I've got. If I could just be a servant, I know I don't even deserve to be called a child anymore. I don't deserve that. If I could just be as a servant. That's the thing. When you walk away from God, if you just have that mentality, God, I know I've fallen, I know I've made some mistakes, but maybe I don't deserve to be called a child of yours, but if I could just serve you, if I could just work for you, if I could just be welcomed back in as a servant in your kingdom. That's what it takes. No matter how far that son had been, and if you've got a child, you know unconditional love. You know the love that father had for that son, even though he was gone, even though he had been out there. He'd gone way out there and done a lot of things that would bring shame to mama and daddy. But the thing that touched me the most is no matter how long he was gone, how far he had been, how much he had wasted of the inheritance that the father had spent his entire life working for. The Bible tells me that when the son began to make his way back, the father was standing there looking. And he seen him from afar. He recognized him. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was thankful. And he came running. He didn't wait on the son to get to him. And why did you do it, son? Why did you fail? Why did you fall? Why did you spend everything that I've earned my whole life to try to give you something for? But no. He fell upon him and he kissed him. And he told him, just prepare a feast. We're going to have a party. Give me the best robe. Kill the fatted calf. We're going to celebrate that which was lost is now found. He's come back home. Let me tell you something. You may have walked away from God, but he's still standing there looking. He's still standing there saying, man, I'm waiting on you. You're my child. I don't care what you've done. Come back home. Sir, I don't care what you've done. I still love you unconditionally. Would you come back today? You see, when a store they receive damaged goods, they can put them on the shelf to be sold. They'll box them up and they'll send them back to the manufacturer. We all come to this house today as damaged goods. We come here today damaged by the things in life. But you're in the manufacturer's house. You've been sent back for a recall. God has recalled each and every one of us. We may have turned our back and walked away on it, but there's been a spiritual recall for a defect in your life. And he's called you back and he says, I want to do something. You're where you need to be. And he's sent me here today, church, to tell you, I'll take you back. I'll take you back just like you are. You see, just pull up to my table and say, begin to sing softly. Pull up to my table. Dine at my table. You're a candidate for grace. Could be coming today. Church could be coming to this altar today. Thank God that time and time again when we become damaged by the cares of life, that we're able to come back to his house and we're able to sit at his table. We're able to dine with him. We're able to return. And then how we are a candidate for grace. God help us this day, Lord, to realize You just want us to rely and trust upon you. God, help me to realize that I need to come back again and again and again. You see these all